Hello and welcome to the second video in our Spring Boot series. Let's jump on in and share screen. Okay, so we've got this starter service template here. First thing you want to do is literally click on use this template and then create a new repository. Name it whatever you like. We're going to be actually doing a DynamoDB config, so you might want to kind of name it relevant to what it's doing. And then once it's generated the actual repo, then you're going to want to clone it down to your local machine and open it up into your IntelliJ or whatever IDE you're actually using. Here's one I did earlier. There's a couple of things that I've added to this already pre-video, purely just to get us off and started on the right foot. I did a short video earlier about the importance of adding things to your gitignore so that you don't end up pushing your secret keys and things to GitHub. So what I've done is I've added to the gitignore application-dev.properties. I think I did that already. Now I've then added a few things into the application properties. We've got this AWS DynamoDB endpoint, AWS DynamoDB access key, and AWS DynamoDB secret key. These will be your actual credentials that you have for your AWS account. So I'm not going to be able to display you with those. Those are your credentials. What I've also added is this Spring Profiles active equals dev, which tells the actual Spring Boot properties setup to look in a application-dev.properties for all of the data. This is your profile, what you're in. So what we can then do is we can copy these then from that one and pop them into here. And then what you can do is you can uncomment those things and add your endpoint, your access key, your secret key to them. That'll be down to your specific one. Like if you're in US West 2, it will be the US West 2 DynamoDB URL. Or if it's a private server, that'll be whatever server you're using. Then your access key will be your actual DynamoDB access key, as in your credentials for your AWS account. And the same thing with your secret key. But because they're in this gitignore, it will never be pushing this stuff that's in this dev properties to GitHub. So you've got no chance of accidentally leaking your keys. Now, when I add my own ones to this, I'm not going to do it on screen. I can give you an example of, imagine them looking at something like this and something like this. I'm going to say we could probably push across the actual the URL, I suppose, because in reality, this one's kind of going to be the same across the board, just with a different region, perhaps. So there is that. So I have that somewhere around for my one, saved in a little text file somewhere. So I'm going to copy that and paste it into the endpoint, because that's perfectly fine. That's like a public normal thing. It's not secret in any way. It's DynamoDB whatever your region is .amazonaws.com. And it starts with HTTPS. So that will be your endpoint, and just swap out whatever your region that you're using is. And then you'll add your access key and your secret key. Again, do not share those things with people. These are just some random things I've just put in for now. Right, so once you've done that, you can save that file. And then when we run it, it's going to be utilizing these things as environmental variables. So let's close the gitignore, close the properties, and close that one. So the main meat of this overall thing is going to be literally a config file to configure the DynamoDB. But to make that config file work, we actually need some dependencies. And for dependencies, I do have a separate video, but for now, we'll do it in place. In the build.gradle file, we have this dependencies area. Now we can gather information to put in here, or actual dependencies to put in here, from what we call Maven Central. So I'm going to go and run you through the process of doing this in the video, but I will have a separate video just with this in if you just want to watch shorter videos for things. So Maven Central repo. Let's take a look at this. We've got this central Maven repository. That's what you're looking for. On this, we can do searches for the type of thing we want. Now, I use the Spring Data DynamoDB, and you'll see it with a little, what looks like a GitHub picture there, the GitHub logo type thing. And we can go and click on that, choose the latest one, click on Gradle Short, and then highlight that and copy it. Now that we've got that, we can go back to our IntelliJ and go and pop it in here. So I'm going to just move down a bit, paste it. And what you will notice is this little sort of icon appears where we can actually load the changes into Gradle. This will now download the bits and pieces that we need, and it will give us the actual resources that we want to use. Now, there is one more dependency that we need, and that's the actual AWS DynamoDB sort of dependency. So while that's downloading, let's jump over here. And I'm going to look for AWS DynamoDB. And this is it, the AWS Java SDK for Amazon DynamoDB. And you'll see it's got this little sort of icon here. So we go in, we choose the latest version. And then Gradle Short and copy again this actual string. So copy, get back to our IntelliJ. I'll just pop it just ahead of this for now, paste. And again, clicking on that little icon to download the dependencies. Once it's finished downloading all those dependencies, we've got enough to start configuring our DynamoDB. So let's close the old Gradle file and go back up here into our main sort of Java files. What we want to do now is we'll make an actual package, a new package called config, to hold any configurations that we make for our project. Inside here, I'm going to make a new Java class. I'm going to call this Java class DynamoDB configuration. Add it to my source control. Now, there's one thing I need to do right at the beginning, and that's set an annotation of @configuration. This utilizes the Spring Framework annotation for configuration that lets it know that it's an actual configuration file. Now that we've done that, we can start setting up some variables for our endpoint, our access key, and our secret key. So we can do that by making a little private string for DynamoDB endpoint. But if I can type endpoint. Oh, special. Now I'm not going to set that to anything directly via code. We'll use an annotation for that in a moment. In fact, let's do the annotation to show you how we're doing that. So we're using an @value annotation, which can be used to pull data from our properties files. So for this, what I do is I make a string, and inside that string, I need to put a $sign and some curly braces. Then I can put my actual variable. Now my variable was AWS dot, what was it? It was DynamoDB dot endpoint. So that pulls that and sets our variable to be what we've pulled from the environmental variables. And we'll make two other ones that are similar. Instead of DynamoDB endpoint, though, we want our AWS access key. And we want our AWS secret key as well. And again, you need to reflect the same variables here as you did in your actual properties file. So let's take a look at those. DynamoDB access key, I'm just going to copy that and paste it in the appropriate space. And same again for the other one, AWS secret key. You could type these out by hand, of course, as well. Okay, so now that's pulled all of the data from our properties file. The next step is going to create a bean to run to map our things. So we need an @bean annotation. And this bean is going to be a DynamoDB mapper. So public DynamoDB mapper. And I'll just call it DynamoDB mapper. It's just going to return a new mapper. The thing is, I need some configuration for this as well. So it's going to return a new DynamoDB mapper. But inside there, I need to provide some configuration. I also need to import these classes. Right, so here we need to provide it some data. We need an actual database client. So we can utilize an Amazon DynamoDB client builder to create it as a factory function. So I'm going to separate that out to its own functionality. So I'm just going to call a function and then create that function or method. So I'll call it Amazon DynamoDB for now. Okay, that doesn't exist, so we're going to create that method. Oops. Or we would do if I press the right button. Create the method. So now we've got this method that we're going to utilize to build our Amazon DynamoDB client. Now we can return an Amazon DynamoDB client builder. So we're going to run the client builder and it's going to return some client to us. We're going to make a standard client. Now we're going to need the endpoint configuration. We're going to need the credentials and we're going to have to build it. So I'm going to do this on multiple lines just to save me going off the screen on one. Let's go on to the next line. The next thing is going to be with an endpoint configuration. So with endpoint configuration. Now, this is going to actually take in an AWS client endpoint configuration. We don't actually have that, so we need to make a new one. So I'll inline say new AWS client builder dot endpoint configuration. And this now needs to take our actual endpoint. So let's give it our DynamoDB endpoint. It also needs a region. So now I'm going to hard code it. You could also put it as a variable if you like, but just for the time being, I'm just going to say US-West-2, which means it's slightly tightly coupled, but don't worry too much. Feel free to add this as a variable as well if you like. So that's that part. But now I need to say, well, now I want to pass on the credentials. So we need a dot with credentials. Here's where we need to build a bunch of new credentials. So I'm going to break that out into its own method as well, so that we're not just ramming everything into one method. So here I'm going to run a Amazon, credentials, pass it Amazon, let's say DynamoDB credentials. Now that hasn't been made, so I've got to make that. What else have we got to do? We need to import this, and we need to make this. Okay. As one final thing to do to this is say, well, once you've got all that data and got all that built, or rather got all that data given to you, you need to build it. So I need to add a .build at the end of this. Now finalize it. Imagine that being on one line. Basically, that is a one-liner, but I thought I'd put it on multiple lines so it actually fits on the screen while we're doing it. Now we need to do the Amazon DynamoDB credentials, and we're going to build that out with a credential provider and a basic credential set from Amazon's DynamoDB stuff. So I want to return a new AWS static credential provider. And that credential provider takes in some sort of credential. So we're going to make a new basic AWS credentials. And we're going to pass that the AWS access key and the AWS secret key that we've gathered from our environmental variables. So AWS access key, comma, AWS secret key. And there you have it. We've created a configuration file. Now, at the moment, this won't do much for me because it'll try and connect to AWS. And at the moment, my credentials are incorrect. So I'm going to pause the video for a moment and put my correct credentials in. Okay, just after doing that, I realized I missed a semicolon line 27, just to make sure that nobody has problems. But yeah, so we've now got all of the correct things in there. It's not actually really connecting to a specific table or doing anything, or, you know, we've just got it configured. Now we can test the configuration by just running it. So let's do that. Okay, so we've ran the web application. It gave us the normal sort of banner, the versioning and everything else. And if you'll notice, we have this thing saying one profile is active dev. So this is where it's using that dev profile, starting up the server. And as you can see, without any errors, it has started. We now have our configuration set, ready to start creating Dynamo database entities. Thank you so much for watching this. It's been absolutely awesome making, and it's always enjoyable making these. Yeah, remember, if you enjoy the content, make sure you subscribe. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give me a thumbs up on that whole like button thing. Have a good one.